If it's Wednesday, breaking news in Tennessee, where local officials just voted to reinstate the second Democrat who had been expelled by State House Republicans in Tennessee after protesting for stricter gun laws, as officials in neighboring Kentucky call for action in that state after this week's deadly mass shooting in Louisville. Plus, an appeals court could rule at any time on the Justice Department's effort to halt a Texas federal judge's ruling that would ban access to a commonly used abortion pill, as the Biden administration warns of irreparable harm if the ruling takes hold. And team arrival, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott moves closer toward an official bid for the White House as former President Trump tries to consolidate his party's support for the nomination. Happy Wednesday and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting from Washington, and we're going to begin today with the political backfire of enormous proportions for Republicans in Tennessee as Republicans nationally struggle with their messaging around important issues for voters, including guns, abortion, and democracy. On guns, what began in Tennessee with an unprecedented move to expel 2 Democratic members of the State House for violating rules of decorum during a demonstration for stricter gun laws has ended with the reinstatement of both members, a call by the Republican governor to strengthen gun laws, and a whole bunch of negative national headlines for the GOP. This was the dramatic scene a short time ago after the Shelby County Board of Commissioners voted to reinstate Justin J. Pearson to his seat in the Tennessee chamber 2 days after the Nashville Metro Council voted unanimously to restore fellow Democrat Justin Jones to his seat. After the vote, a defiant Pearson spoke to supporters outside, rallying them on the issue of stricter gun laws, while also lashing out at state Republicans. At one point, even accusing them of acting like white supremacists.
Now that the Shelby County Commission done their job, I'm so glad we get back to doing our job. And what is our job? It's to elevate the voices of the 6 kids, the 6 people in Nashville. The 3 children who were just 9 years old. To elevate the 5 folk in Louisville who died from gun violence that was preventable. We know it's preventable because there are good laws that exist. We know it's preventable because there are organizations advocating for the change of the law in order to save people's lives. They tried to kill democracy. They tried to expel the people's choice and the people's vote. And they awakened a sleeping giant.
Bottom line, in an effort to quiet dissent from the handful of Democrats in the Tennessee State House on the issue of gun reform, those Tennessee Republicans have instead given the so-called Tennessee 3 a national platform. And instead of relegating the gun debate, Republicans may have supercharged it. In fact, it's Republican Governor of Tennessee, Bill Lee, who just signed an executive order to strengthen background checks. And he also called on the legislature to pass the equivalent of a red flag law.
It is possible and it is important that we find a way to remove individuals who are a threat to themselves or to our society, to remove them from access to weapons. I'm asking the legislature to bring forth thoughtful, practical measures to do that, to strengthen our laws, to separate those dangerous people from firearms, while at the same time preserving the constitutional rights of the people of this state.
It's a notable move from a governor in a red state. In fact, the Tennessee Firearms Association has already accused Lee of, get this, of caving to the, quote, mob on gun control. Again, he just advocated a red flag law. Wasn't even talking about at all of restricting law-abiding citizens from purchasing a weapon. The proposed laws are a far cry from the kind of reforms that many Democrats and activists are calling for, including real bans on certain weapons. That's not what Governor Lee called for. It also comes in the wake of another mass shooting this week that killed 5 at a bank in neighboring Kentucky. That bank shooting in Louisville and last month's school shooting in Nashville that killed 6 have now become 2 of the latest tragic data points among the 147 mass shootings across the United States this calendar year alone, and it is only mid-April. 102 days, in fact. It's an issue that is not going away, And as we noted, it's another issue where Republicans could find themselves out of step with public opinion, which is often a politically perilous place to be, as they're finding out on the issue of abortion. Joining me now on the ground in Memphis is our own Katie Beck. Katie, this was a fascinating, what turned into a political rally, if you will. But a couple of days ago, there was still some question of whether the Shelby County Commission would do this, because there was some reports that there was a lot of pressure being put on the Shelby County Council there not to reappoint Justin J. Pearson. That clearly seemed to erode pretty fast.
Well, it's important to note, Chuck, that this is actually a 13-member commission. There were 7 Democrats today who voted unanimously to reinstate Pearson. There were 2 Democrats that were actually out of the country and couldn't be present for the vote. And there were 4 Republicans that were absent today. They were not at the table. So it does sort of show you how the layout was here today, and the fact that they needed that simple majority. They needed 7 out of 13 to get it across the line, and they got just that. They did it extremely expeditiously. When they reinstated Jones, it happened in less than 5 minutes, and I think this was in less than 2 minutes of them gaveling into this meeting. They had quickly taken that vote. They actually put public comment behind the vote, which is unusual. Usually the comments come beforehand and then they take the vote. But it was almost symbolically saying to people, we've already decided on this, and we want to let you have your say, but the vote has been determined.
You know, Katie, it's not lost on us that the very thing the Tennessee Three were campaigning for, essentially, can we have a debate about some new gun reform laws? In some ways, the Republican governor has responded to their call. How are Tennessee State House Republicans reacting to Governor Lee's call for a red flag law and some action by that legislature?
Well, Republicans have been strangely sort of silent in the past few days. We haven't heard a lot of comments on gun control laws specifically. The Speaker of the House was questioned about these reinstatements after Jones' reinstatement Monday, and he said that he would honor the laws of the legislature, and that if these municipalities voted to reinstate them, that he would respect that and follow the rules. That has been about as far as they have gone. But these comments from Lee, and of course the executive order asking legislators to put politics and pride aside and really find a bipartisan road here to get this done, is unusual language coming from Lee. And I think that's been noted by not just Republicans, but Democrats as well. They're certainly saying this is a step in the right direction, perhaps not as far as they would like to take it, but to hear him say these things has certainly been encouraging for their fight.
Katie Beck on the ground for us in Memphis, Tennessee. Katie, thank you. Turning now from Tennessee to Kentucky, where a vigil is set to begin next hour for the 5 people killed in Monday's shooting at a bank. The shooting has renewed calls in that state for action from Democratic lawmakers. It's a state with some of the laxest gun laws in the country on that front, and leading those efforts is the mayor of Louisville, who was a target himself of gun violence last year. And joining me now is the mayor of Louisville, Craig Greenberg. Mayor Greenberg, welcome to Meet the Press. You now join a whole bunch of mayors around this country who've been in this exact position. You've had this massive loss of life via gun violence. Sometimes it's one event, sometimes it's a lot of events over a period of time. And there's only so much you can do besides rhetoric, right? Because at the end of the day, it's state laws, it's federal laws. So let's start with, you said you need help from Frankfurt and Washington. That is rhetorically true. How do you make that statement a reality?
Well, I'm already hard at work at that. We've been doing everything we can at the local level, consistent with Kentucky law, to try to reduce the amount of gun violence since I took office literally 100 days ago today. But now I'm calling on, as you mentioned, for more help. And so the good news is I am cautiously optimistic today that after our call yesterday to work together, putting politics aside and just focusing on areas of agreements and solutions to end the constant gun violence that we're seeing in cities like Louisville and across the country. I've heard from members of the state legislature, members of both political parties that want to talk, that want to work together to make some positive steps forward. And so we're going to have conversations in the coming days about what we can do together to take meaningful action.
Where do you do it? Because Kentucky passed a law, the General Assembly passed a law that literally makes the state a, quote, Second Amendment sanctuary state. And what the law means, according to Josh Bray, the state representative who wrote it, that it would that the law would bar local and state police from enforcing any federal firearm regulation that might attempt to ban guns or ammunition or firearm accessories like bump stocks that take effect after January 21st, 2021. So you throw that in there, that takes away a lot of things you could do having to do with the weapon itself. But it doesn't address waiting periods. And that to me seems to be maybe the best realistic place to start.
There's that. There's issues related to red flag laws. They're of many different shapes and sizes. But I'm asking for two things initially, and this list can and will grow. One is local autonomy. We in Louisville have a unique gun violence epidemic that is different from other parts of our state of Kentucky. Just like in other issues, give us local autonomy to address our unique, horrible gun violence epidemic that we're dealing with right now. And second, in addition to the law that you just mentioned, there are laws on the books right now that would make me a criminal for implementing any efforts to try to reduce the amount specifically of gun violence that the real criminals are using the guns. That would make me a criminal. And we also have a law on the books right now in Kentucky that AR-15 rifle that was used to murder 5 people 2 days ago, and that was used to shoot at the rescuing police officers, will one day be back on the streets. Because right now, under Kentucky law, we are required to turn that gun over to the state, who in turn is required to auction it off. That is insane. That's dangerous. That's absurd. It's got to change. So I'm asking.
What was that? Do you have any idea what the motivation was for that law? I mean, it's truly not to waste any weapon.
No, I have no idea. The only possible answer that I have is that the proceeds of those auctions are used to support police departments and give them the equipment that they need. I firmly support that. We have plenty of money at the state and local level that we will ensure that our police officers have the resources they need to do their job, to keep us safe and to keep themselves safe. That is, of course, the number one priority. But we don't need to auction off weapons to do that. And so we should have the local ability that if we want to destroy weapons that have been used to commit violent crimes, weapons that are illegally confiscated, we should be able to destroy them. Right now, I'd be a criminal if I had our city do that.
Let me ask you this, though, about wanting local autonomy on gun laws. That, in theory, sounds great. Ask the city of Chicago. But at the end of the day, the Indiana-Chicago-Illinois line isn't very far from the city, and you know what that means. Plenty of guns come in. Wisconsin has very loose gun purchasing laws. So Chicago has some tough laws on the books. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't stop the flow of weapons into the city. So while I get wanting autonomy, can it even work if literally state law is working against you?
We have the same issue here. Indiana is right across the river from where we are here in Louisville, but we have to start somewhere. And so to me, if we can find areas of common ground where we can start having conversations and taking actions and steps to reduce the amount of gun violence, whether it's mass shootings or whether it's individual shootings that happen far too often in cities like Louisville, then let's take those first steps. And slowly over time, we will build on them. I would love to do more, but I'm also trying to be realistic about what we can do. And so let's focus on what we can do together.
This is an election year in the state. The governor's up for re-election. A lot of the assembly. Does that can sometimes help a cause like this or hurt a cause like this? What do you think it's going to do?
Well, I'm hopeful. I'm just hopeful that in the aftermath of this tragedy, which has now directly impacted so many people in our city, that elected officials are ready to take action. People who are elected to office, if they're not going to take action to save lives, to prevent tragedies, why be in office? And so now with this hitting so close to home and with the amount of gun violence that we're dealing with on a weekly basis in Louisville and in so many other cities, I am hopeful that now is the time. And based on the feedback I've gotten over the past 24 hours, I am cautiously optimistic.
And that means, but realistically, we're talking red flag laws, and you're not talking about messing with the weapon itself, right? That's probably a bridge too far in Kentucky.
Well, we'll see. In the coming days, we're having a vigil tonight at 5 p.m. to mourn the loss of our friends who have been murdered this week. Conversations will begin in the coming days, and so we'll see where they lead. I will certainly be advocating for significant action, but I definitely want to make sure that we have results, and so we'll see where that ends up.
Mayor Greenberg, I was saying to you this off camera. I mean, I think the toughest job in America these days is to be a mayor of a city of any significant size these days of population. It is not easy. Moments like this are just a reminder of that. Stay safe yourself. You were nearly a victim of gun violence yourself as a candidate. And here's hoping for the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chuck.
Coming up, an appeals court could now rule at any time involving that abortion pill drug as the Justice Department pushes to block the Texas court ruling from limiting access to that pill. Could take effect later this week. We have the latest on what to expect and when next. Plus, a primary state push, the newest potential Republican presidential candidate, hits the ground in an exploratory way in Iowa, and he's got company. We're on the ground in the Hawkeye State ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals could be ruling at any time on whether or not it will halt a Texas judge's ruling to pull a common abortion drug off the shelves before it goes into effect on Saturday. In dueling court briefs, the Biden administration and the anti-abortion groups who originally brought the Texas case both fought to convince the court to take their side. The DOJ and the drug manufacturer are asking the court to keep the pill available while the case is decided. Pharmaceutical companies filed a new brief backing the administration last night, warning that the ruling could have disastrous implications. Quote, far from being limited to one drug, the logic of the district court's order overturns the long-settled legal basis of FDA's drug approval process. Unless stayed, the district court's lawless opinion will empower any plaintiff to grind drug approvals to a halt, disrupting patients' access to critical medicines. Joined now by our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. So, Laura, at this point, what more does the Fifth Circuit need to be doing before they issue their ruling? And look, the clock is ticking here. When do you expect this?
Yeah, they really could rule at any point now, Chuck. As you mentioned, the Justice Department and this pill manufacturer called Danco want essentially to get a hold on that order that's set to go into effect Saturday so they can at least have some breathing room, try to make their best arguments. It's called an administrative stay, and it would really just be a pause on everything. It wouldn't really be speaking to the merits of the actual legal arguments. It would just essentially be a freeze on Judge Kaczmarek's order. Remember, the other issue here is this other decision lurking in the background. So if in effect, let's play this out. If in effect Kaczmarek's order goes into effect, you have this conflicting ruling out of another federal court with the same jurisdiction in Washington State. And in that case, the judge said, let's just leave everything as is, maintain the status quo. And so the question is, how are you supposed to reconcile these two? Now, it's not clear that the Fifth Circuit will take that into account, if at all. The Justice Department has asked for clarification from that judge in Washington about how they're supposed to deal with this. But again, the Fifth Circuit could do whatever it wants. Or I should mention, it could just sit on this. In prior abortion cases that have come before the Fifth Circuit, they've essentially just done nothing, which would in effect be doing something, because then Kaczmarek's order would go into effect.
I was just going to say, if they do nothing, midnight Saturday, what happens?
Then we are in sort of uncharted territory, because remember, what he did was interesting. He put a stay, which is just a hold on the effective date of the drug. And what that means is as if the drug was never approved 23 years ago. And you might have heard some people calling it a ban or something like that. It's really different than that. And some have sort of posited that he did this on purpose, because by not ordering the FDA to do anything, the plaintiffs are saying that the Justice Department can't even really challenge this. And so they're trying to get the whole case tossed out in front of the Fifth Circuit, saying, look, this judge actually didn't order the FDA to do anything. once the FDA stamp of approval on this drug is no longer, then potentially the drug manufacturers have something to say about that. But that's not an issue for the FDA. And so that's something that the Fifth Circuit could also potentially latch onto if it wants to.
Laura, I saw some speculation that as the Biden administration tries to figure out a response to resubmit the drug for current FDA approval, what would that do to this case?
I mean, you could try. Certainly, that's not going to be an ideal position for Danco, the drug manufacturer. But certainly nothing in the judge's order would prevent them from doing that. But, I mean, imagine that would take a really long time. And for a drug that's been on the market for 23 years, I think some would say that would be sort of untenable at this point. But certainly they could if they needed to. But I think this is part of why you see Big Pharma coming out in force against this decision, because for them it's terrifying that they could spend all this money and do all this research just to have one judge sort of throw it all out.
Look, before the Trump era, I would have said, oh, there is no chance that an appeals court lets this go through. I don't want to assume anything anymore. But what would be the rationale to allow this to go through? Because, again, one thing that I thought I understood about the judiciary, particularly on the federal level, particularly a circuit or a Supreme Court, is they certainly don't want to upend. If you think something is going to upend a market or upend society in a short-term way, you got to let it play out. I mean, this screams at a minimum, hey, we're going to set this. You know, it's not going to take effect, but let's hear the case.
Certainly. But I guess the argument in response would be, if you truly believe that this drug is dangerous, and if you truly believe that people are being harmed, then that's something you would want to block right away. If you truly believe that the people are actually at risks and their lives are at risk. Of course, the FDA would say, we have a 23-year history proving that this drug is safe and effective, and so they would push back on that. But certainly the judge in Texas, he is very much convinced, or at least on paper says he's convinced by that evidence.
Well, there's a number of ways the Fifth Circuit could toss this. They could also just go to standing. No evidence yet whether they will do that, but that is also another way they could go. Laura Jarrett, our senior legal correspondent. Laura, thank you.
Sure.
We also got a quick development I wanted to share this afternoon on another legal case we've been watching closely. The Dominion Voting Systems lawsuit against Fox News is set to go to trial days from now. And Fox News is in some serious hot water with the judge who just sanctioned Fox officially for withholding evidence in the defamation case. According to a person who was in the Delaware courtroom today, Dominion played recordings of a now former Fox News producer she made during the 2020, which were not handed over to Dominion's lawyers during discovery. That producer, Abby Grossberg, is now also suing Fox News, claiming her deposition in this defamation case was coerced. The sanction against Fox gives Dominion a chance to conduct another deposition, and Fox has to pay for it. The judge, meanwhile, says he's also considering an additional investigation and censure. Fox News responded minutes ago in a statement saying, as counsel explained to the court, Fox produced the supplemental information from Ms. Grossberg when we first learned it. Up next, we are live in Iowa, where the Republican Senator Tim Scott just made his first official move towards launching a 2024 run against Donald Trump and a growing field of Republicans. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning to the 2024 presidential race, South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott is officially kind of considering throwing his hat in the ring. Scott formally announced an exploratory committee, which, as far as the FEC is concerned, there is no such thing. You're either a presidential campaign committee, which now Tim Scott is, or you're not. But they are calling it an exploratory committee. He set that up. He takes him to Iowa, New Hampshire, and his home state of South Carolina this week. Here's some footage of Scott at an event with Iowa Congresswoman Ashley Hinson this morning. By the way, she's a candidate that he has been paying for his own ads to support back in 2022. A favorite of his Senate colleagues, Scott was his caucus's point man on police reform negotiations with Democrats after the killing of George Floyd. But those bipartisan bona fides were nowhere to be found in his launch video that focused more on his own backstory and his contempt for the current version of the Democratic Party.
If the radical left gets their way, millions more families will be trapped in failing schools, crime-ridden neighborhoods, and crushing inflation.
Not on my watch.
This is personal to me. I will never back down in defense of the conservative values that make America exceptional. And that's why I'm announcing my exploratory committee for President of the United States.
Ali Vitale is following Tim Scott in Iowa. And Ali, I always like to say, you know, there's no such thing as an exploratory committee. You either have one, or you're either running for president or you're not. He opened a committee. He's running for president. But it's interesting that they're choosing to call it exploratory. Have they given any reason as to why he hasn't? Is there a final decision he's looking to contemplate here?
Yeah, and frankly, that's one of the questions that I was going to ask him this morning, if he had chosen to talk to press and if he had opened up his first event since announcing this exploratory committee, because I do think that's one of the open questions. You know, Chuck, we've watched him go around the country to the states that often pick up our attention, the Iowas, New Hampshires, South Carolinas, and Nevadas. He's been going to all of those states as part of this tour of America that he's done as a listening tour before the exploratory phase. Now we know that he's doing Iowa, New Hampshire, and then back to South Carolina for this weekend, where he's once again going to huddle with donors. He's someone who is a prolific fundraiser. That's never really been a problem for him. Putting the money together for this operation is not going to be the hard part. The hard part is going to be what his message actually is on the campaign trail and what resonates with a group of people who, at least here in Iowa, as I've been talking to them, are open to someone who is not Trump. I think that there might be some Trump fatigue, at least among the voters that I've found, but he's going to have to find a way to differentiate himself, and right now he's not doing that.
You know, it's interesting. He reminds me of candidates in the past where they're incredible on paper candidates, and then you see them play out and you're wondering, okay, is it, on the Democratic side, Bill Bradley and John Glenn are two of my favorite examples. Incredible on paper candidates, and they just struggle to connect. Did you see evidence there? Is he connecting? Is there an audience there?
Or even Senator Kamala Harris, someone who I think of who struggled here in Iowa and then ultimately dropped out before ballots were even cast. I think there are a lot of those kinds of people. There's a question of if that's going to be Senator Tim Scott. I think there's a real question, as someone who's watched Governor Ron DeSantis over the course of 2 gubernatorial campaigns, if he's going to have that same kind of a problem of connecting in the kind of retail politics that is bread and butter here in Iowa and in New Hampshire. For Scott, though, I think the fact that he came in, did a closed press event for his first event here. We're going to do another event with him here later tonight in just a few hours behind me. It's going to be interesting to see the way that he actually talks with this crowd, the things that he isn't necessarily leading with in terms of the thing that we know him for on the Hill, leading on police reform in bipartisan fashion. He hasn't talked about that here yet. It's going to be interesting with what he leads with to connect here. Ali Vitale on the ground for us in Iowa. Ali, thank you. Joining me now on set, Eugene Daniels, White House correspondent and playbook co-author at Politico. Also an NBC News political analyst, Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino, also an NBC News contributor, and Jim Garrity, senior political correspondent for National Review, and he's a contributing columnist at our friends over at the Washington Post. I want to start things off here, Eugene, because Scott, in some ways, obviously, a unique biography, and he's leaning into it not in the way you'd necessarily assume. Let me play this portion of his video. Okay, here's what he says in the video. I thought we did cut this. They're promoting victimhood instead of personal responsibility. Apparently we have it. Let's go.
They're promoting victimhood instead of personal responsibility, and they're indoctrinating our children to believe we live in an evil country. And all too often, when they get called out for their failures, they weaponize race to divide us, to hold on to their power. When I fought back against their liberal agenda, they called me a prop, a token, because I disrupt their narrative. I threaten their control. They know the truth of my life disproves their lies.
Eugene, it was this portion of his video I thought, okay, this is his message, and it's a primary voter message. Nominate me, I control the left in a way that no other nominee can.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you hear from people of color who are Republicans often, right? And when I talk to Republicans who saw this video, but also he did something very similar when he was the counterpoint to Biden's State of the Union address a couple of years ago, right? Where he talked about the left calling him an Uncle Tom and that you can't talk about race with me, I'm black. That happens with people of color who are Republicans all the time. And for Republicans,
it resonates to a white audience, doesn't it?
Exactly, because it makes them feel like, see, I can't be racist. This guy, Tim Scott, said I'm not, right? And that is something that Republican strategists I've been talking to have said are going to be a huge part of both him. There's Vivek, but there's also Nikki Haley, who is talking about this similarly.
Is it enough, Jim? What else does he need to combine with that? Like, it feels like, okay, it gets you in the room.
There's a lot to like about Tim Scott, but it's a very weird moment for a guy like him with that persona, the happy warrior, to be running for the nomination of a Republican Party that is angry, that is very upset about the state of the country. They're upset about immigration. They're upset about the state of the economy, inflation. They don't like all the money going over to Ukraine. This is a very frustrated, dark, dour, seething base of the party.
It's a good observation.
And so it's like, I've never been cheerier or bright. Our future's brighter, but also things have never been worse.
No, it was odd to me. Maria Teresa, I just look at it and I was like, you know what's funny about Tim Scott is he's the president of the Senate dining room.
Yep.
Like, every Senate Republican I talk, oh, Tim Scott, please make it Tim. Okay, this is your nominee. I get it. Good luck. I mean, please, they're like almost begging voters to pick Tim Scott here. I don't think he's leading with his best self.
I don't think... Well,
but I understand why he's doing what he's doing.
Right, but I actually think it's doubling down on what Eugene is saying. It's basically trying to pacify a group of Republicans that are saying, I'm not that racist, and the other part saying, come on over, people of color, the water's warm. And I say this because what he talks about specifically in a lot of focus groups, what we're seeing is that education is an untested issue that the Democrats have to address. We're coming out of a 2-year pandemic where moms, specifically moms of color, are finally recognizing that their kids are not up to level when it comes to reading and to reading and math. And they're like, well, maybe we need to have this conversation. And that is one of the reasons why you talk about crime. Crime, when it comes to places like even California and New York City, everybody's talking about it when I go on these, listening tours, so to speak. And so I think that what he led with is trying to siphon off some communities of color in different ways. And he's more trying to be used by the Republicans. But it's a strategy among the Republicans to bring more people. Is it going to work? He doesn't motivate. He doesn't have a base. And when it comes to taking out primary voters, he's not going to take out a primary voter to go vote for him.
I do. That's the thing I have. I understand the idea. Like I said, he strikes me. This feels like John Glenn, Bill Bradley, where the idea, you're like, the guy who orbited the moon, of course you make him president. And he's from Ohio. You're like, oh my gosh. And then it didn't work. He doesn't. The thing he's best known for is not something that's going to sell to any Republican primary vote.
No, not at all. And the fact that he's not talking about it, he knows that, and it also failed, right? So, it's not really something you want to lead with because it actually.
And he won't take on Trump. And I guess it comes back to this, Jim. How do you? The Ric Flair question. How do you be the man without beating the man?
Yeah, no, it has been frightening and a little unnerving for those of us who are not fans of Donald Trump to see Ron DeSantis hold back. He's not running yet. He's still handling stuff in the Florida State Legislature. Nikki Haley, not particularly interested in taking shots.
She took a shot on the memo. What did you make of the memo?
Okay. Sorry. Duck, that memo's coming for you. No. When you get up...
It's a strongly worded memo.
Maybe some of it will happen when they're on a debate stage, and they turn to you and say, you're a maniac, you lost the race, your time is over. Like, maybe it'll happen, but I'm not... So far, we're not seeing it. And I don't think Asa Hutchinson is going to be the guy who's going to come out and bloody Trump's nose.
Ironically, the only place it can happen is on the debate stage. I actually agree. That actually, as much as people want to see it on the stump. Now, people want to see you take Trump on when Trump's on the stage.
Well, you want to see, more than anything is taking them on, but his reaction to it. And that's what they're going to have to figure out is like, how do you actually get him off his game where he is feeling disrespected, he is being dressed down, and that is going to have to be, I believe, someone that he thinks is good looking and a little smarter than him.
Let me move to the political convention decision. I kind of think it doesn't matter. I feel like the political convention, that went away. Yeah. Like, we just learned, there's a better way to do it, and why the city doesn't matter. But let me ask this. Did the Democratic Party really let a couple of missing union hotels in Atlanta decide which city gets this convention? Because if the party wants to grow itself, and you do believe a convention serves that purpose, it actually makes more sense to put it in Atlanta and Chicago. And the only reason I think they didn't pick Atlanta was due to the number of union hotels.
No, that's right. One of the things that people kept saying outside of just that, it's just harder to do a big event in Atlanta. Like, basically, the hotels, so it was like a lot of logistical...
It was too... The hotels aren't close enough together.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
so like a lot of logistical
yeah.
complaints. But I think you're right. The location doesn't matter as much. The DNC, everyone I talked to while this decision was being made was saying, like, it doesn't actually matter where you do it, right? If you go to Georgia, are you all of a sudden going to have voters who say, you know what, you came to my state, so I'm going to vote for Joe Biden? That's not going to happen. President Biden doesn't have any kind of primary, so none of that matters. None of the location matters at this point.
Well, the only way that I think that actually Chicago does make sense, though, is the media market that it surrounds.
Right.
Because it bleeds into Wisconsin and the other states that are closer.
Event, though.
No, but it bleeds in a different way when you're leading up to it. And I share with you because
I've heard this about Denver in 08.
No, yeah.
I mean, it mattered in Denver in 08.
Did you read my mind? I was about to use Denver in 08.
But that is, I think it's an exception that sort of, that was a first. It was the first time we'd gone out west that wasn't California.
Yeah,
so that was an interesting thing.
Yeah, no, but it was a drumming up of what is happening. And I think that there's going to be a contrast because if you think about it, Wisconsin, the Republicans lost that by like 20,000, 30,000 votes. It was very minimal. And that's why they're claiming to go there. In Chicago, yes, they won Illinois by over 1 million, but it's the surrounding media market that actually allows them to bleed into the other spaces that
but the
Atlanta
Republicans
would not allow that.
preferred Nashville. They're only in Milwaukee because the Nashville said no.
It's a little curious to not pick an absolutely totally safe state, but you're right. It's neighborhood.
No, it is a done deal now. It's going to be Milwaukee.
What really resolved this was J.B. Pritzker coming around and saying, "How much money? You're going to run out of money? Here's some. Here's the petty cash drawer."
You're 100% right.
And Biden doesn't have to make a lot of calls.
Correct.
But making
these things are horrible. All the rules they've put into place of who can give money. Right,
you know,
which you're all aware of.
J.B. Vixer, what's really interesting about that is that there have been rumors that he wants to run for president. So is he preparing his coffers for 2028? That could be the strategy.
J.B. Fixer or J.B. Fixer? J.B. Fixer of the convention. Anyway, Eugene, Maria Teresa, and Jim, thank you all. After the break, I have a little data download for you. The Biden administration just unveiled an extremely ambitious proposal to rev up this country's move towards electric cars. The auto industry and the biggest auto union, the United Auto Workers, they're trying to both pump the brakes on this one. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Data download time. The Biden administration today announced a proposal for what would be the toughest auto emissions standards in U.S. history, and the White House's most ambitious push to date towards reaching some significant carbon reduction goals. If this is enacted, the plan aims to push the auto industry toward nearly full electrification, essentially by the middle of the next decade. It could mean that 67% of all new vehicles sold would be electric by 2032, and that's more than 2/3 of all new cars. Now, if successful, it would reduce 10 billion, with a B, tons of CO2 by 2055. It's the equivalent of erasing more than 2 full years of the CO2 emissions currently produced in the United States. So let's look to see how realistic and how we get here. So as we said, the percent of new car sales right now in 2032 has to hit 67%. Here's where we are in 2022. And look, we've had some significant jumps. 2020, 1.7%. It doubles in 2021, nearly doubles in 2022. So, you go on this doubling, and it's not as if we're not going to get close to 67% if we stick to that. But that's where we're going to have to be in order to get there. Now, just so you get, right now, what it would mean is your entire fleet. So if you're GM, it doesn't mean you can't have any gas cars. It just means overall, your net grams, essentially, of what you're emitting per mile. In 1975, it was 3.1, and then you can see, starting in 94, we really got stringent here. And right now, this 2025 number of 0.03, most of the fleets have already hit that. By about 2017, they hit this. So this means you got to take it down to 0.01 by 2032. That's the official sort of marker here of measurement that begins this process. So what stands in the way of making that? Well, we've got the old raw material issue. We have battery capacity that we're not yet. Are we going to have the batteries themselves? We also have a charging station issue. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And, of course, the cost of electric vehicles. So let me show you one of those things. Right now, we only have about 130 charging stations. We need 2.3 by 2030 if we're going to have this amount of cars on the road. Now, that said, it means over the next 7 years, about 300,000 charging stations got to be added at a minimum per year to meet this number. Now, part of the Inflation Reduction Act was about doing that, and arguably, we have places to put these charging stations. They're called gas stations. So at some point, working with the oil companies to become charging stations is likely going to be a place we go. Then you look at vehicle costs, and this is, again, where the Inflation Reduction Act comes in. Right now, the average overall vehicle price, just under 50 grand. Average electric vehicle is just over 60 grand. This Inflation Reduction Act gives you a tax credit of $7,500. That brings the cost down here to about $5,400, so then you'd have a $5,000 difference. This, however, by the way, the amount now that we expect consumers to use this tax credit is going to be far higher than we expect, than what was budgeted for. That's going to be a hit on our own debt and deficit coming up. Still to come, as Pentagon officials scramble to control the damage after top secret intelligence information was leaked online, I'm going to talk to a former DOJ leak czar who led the investigation in the Edward Snowden leak about what's happening right now behind the scenes in an attempt to find the leaker. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The entire government, but the White House for sure, is focused on trying to find out who leaked sensitive and top secret Pentagon documents online. The administration is also grappling with the fallout with both adversaries and allies, and the potential that intelligence sources and methods were compromised. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said his department will turn over every rock until they find the source and determine the extent of this leak. And last night, the CIA Director Bill Burns called the leak deeply unfortunate, but would not elaborate further because of the ongoing investigation by both the Pentagon and the DOJ. Obviously, all those reactions indicate that much of the actual leaked documents are accurate. Even as President Biden is abroad, my NBC News colleagues have new reporting about how the administration is looking to prevent this from happening again, including possibly by expanding how intelligence agencies monitor social media sites and online chat rooms where the classified Pentagon documents first started circulating. Joining me now is NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuce, who broke that story. He's at the Pentagon for us right now. And Brandon Van Grack is a former senior national security official at the Department of Justice. He oversaw leak investigations, including being the lead prosecutor in the Edward Snowden investigation. So it's good to have Brandon's expertise with us. But Dan, let's start with the straight-up reporting. Let's start with this idea of monitoring. Who is it that they're monitoring? Are they going to be monitoring those with top secret credentials and what they do online, or monitoring the platform themselves for chatter? What's the idea behind this?
I think we are facing a very similar challenge that the U.S. has faced for the past 2 decades, even beyond, right? We heard about this before after the January 6th attack, right? You know, why didn't the FBI pick up on some of this chatter? So here these documents appeared in a private chat room weeks and weeks ago and then kind of migrated out of there. Now, yes, I think they're talking about looking at some of these social media sites, even these obscure gaming sites or apps. But there's a limit here legally to what the U.S. can do, as always, right? So if it's a private chat room, then it becomes very difficult. You've got to have probable cause. Right. As one former official said, you can't burst into the club for no reason. So it's still a challenge here, but they're scrambling because it's a bit embarrassing that this stuff was sort of circulating out there for a while.
Well, that's why I asked specifically, Dan, what's the monitoring aspect? Is it monitoring those with security clearance who could be going on these sites? Or is it about the sites themselves?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think it's both. Now, of course, again, now there's another dilemma, once again, about how much do you share intelligence inside the government? Is the information being shared too broadly? Senator Warner and others are questioning that now. And, of course, the pendulum swings back and forth, right? After 9/11, it was all about silos.
Brandon, let me bring you in here. You obviously lead prosecutor in the Edward Snowden case, so you know a lot about where do you begin in a leak case. And first, leak versus hack. Are you pretty convinced this is a leak, not a hack?
Oh Lord, I'm not convinced of anything. I think that based on all we know right now, we have physical documents, photos, and so that at least wouldn't necessarily be what we would expect to see for some sort of intrusion. But the reality is I think it seems clear, at least at this point, there's a lot we don't know, and so I don't think we can jump to conclusions either way.
I'm curious just to get your legal expertise and what I'm getting at with Dan here. So when you get a security clearance, do you sign any of your rights away?
Well, you certainly make certain commitments. There's an agreement, and the reality is there's limitations on what you can do with that in those documents. And I actually think to go to your specific point, there are I think somewhere like 3 million people that have an active security clearance. You can't monitor 3 million people, and you can't monitor what is endless amounts of classified
But do you have
information.
probable cause on going in there if you know somebody with a security clearance is going into that game room? Is that enough for probable cause to monitor that platform or not?
I guess so. Whether there is or isn't, there's an endless number of ways that people can disclose classified information. They don't need social media to do so. That is just one of endless numbers of ways that
it's just a place to disseminate.
It is, and so the point is, like, to some degree, the problem of monitorship, that's not necessarily the solution. That is, you know, a way to do it. But I do think this just goes to a broader point as well, which is because you can't monitor 3 million people and you can't monitor documents, part of this is enforcement. You have to enforce the laws to deter the conduct in the first place.
All right, let's go to the investigation itself. The only entity that I would think is more skeptical of DOJ messing around in their business, besides NSA, would be the Pentagon. So here, the FBI is conducting this investigation. How hard is it? I mean, you had to penetrate the NSA. Did you run into hurdles, or how cooperative does it get?
No, and I wouldn't even use the term penetration. I think these investigations, I mean, leak investigations happen all the time. And what happens is, even though the reporting is, Pentagon is leading sort of the review, the Department of Justice and the FBI are part of it. Like, it's completely collaborative. I wouldn't say penetrate, it's collaborative. This is one of those times when everyone is pointing in the right direction, in the same direction, and so I wouldn't say that there's any barriers. I'd be very surprised if there are any barriers there.
Are you surprised we don't have a suspect yet? Or that we don't, that it appears, and maybe we do and we haven't heard about it, but please, everybody chatters. Like, I feel like if we had an idea that we were close to closing this down, that news would be out there. The fact that we don't, what does that tell you?
You know, even in investigations that we're aware of now, where it turns out very early on, it didn't seem like we had a suspect. The reality is they may in fact have a suspect, and they are sort of doing the diligence and investigation they need to make the arrest. And so it doesn't surprise me. I will say it concerns me because
that we know so little. It feels like we knew about the Snowden thing pretty quick.
Well, I actually don't think we did, at least publicly.
I happened a lot earlier than we thought.
Well, I would just say that in terms of the timeline, like, this is only a week. Less than a week since it came out, and I don't think if you look at the timeline when news...
But haven't we been investigating? I mean, people at the Pentagon knew something had gotten leaked. I mean, they knew a lot sooner, didn't they not?
I mean, maybe. Like, we don't know. I'm just saying publicly, if you actually look at the leak that began in the Edward Snowden case and the leak that began here, like, we're still less than a week into this investigation. But I do think it's concerning in terms of the damage. The threat is still live. Like, we can, even if we don't know what the motive is of this individual, the threat is still live.
Dan, I'm curious, because of that threat, what measures has the Pentagon taken?
Well, I think that's a key point here, that as far as we know, this threat is live. And there's only so much you can do with a live threat, right? So, yes, they are trying to restrict the pool of people who have access to sensitive or classified information. That's sort of a standard response in this case. And of course, they're going to be looking at who printed out classified documents. That is supposed to be something that is recorded. There's a track record of that. But, you know, there's another aspect of all this. A lot of former intelligence officials feel like this is unprecedented in some ways. It's different. You don't have a kind of classic double agent scenario where the documents are being passed to a foreign adversary in some way directly, and you don't have a classic whistleblower kind of scenario.
Like Reality Winner? Well, we might. The motive behind this might be a form of this, right? But we just don't know yet.
But if you're a whistleblower, why do you go to a private chat room to divulge your secrets to a few people, to a few thousand people, instead of the whole world, or to a media organization? So it is strange. It is unusual. Some people think it's amateurish, but I just think we still don't know.
Brendan, you have seen sort of this idea, and there's some chatter, we overclassify, there's too much of this, too many people have access to this. If you were king for a day, how would you clean up the classification process in our system?
You know, it is incredibly difficult. I mean, the reality is I don't know, because it is that difficult. The problem, when I was even in the government, they really, even now, take pains to try to limit overclassification. It's a struggle. I think there's just an important point here. We don't know if that's the issue here. For all we know, the person that leaked that information had every right and need to have that information.
And they just took it upon themselves.
Exactly. So that would be a screening issue. That person, and so I think there is sometimes a rush to sort of conclude that's the problem, and we actually don't know that yet. And I think it makes this challenge even more difficult.
Right. We don't know getting the motive here, and we just don't have a motive.
Exactly.
All right. Dan DeLuce at the Pentagon, Brandon Van Grack, who led the Edward Snowden prosecution. Thank you both for being here. Thank you all for being with here this hour. By the way, for more discussion and analysis on the Pentagon leak story? Scan that QR code that's on the bottom of your screen right now to get today's episode of the Chuck Todd Cast. I've got Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kube and former CIA Director John Brennan as my guests all throughout the whodunit on this one, so don't miss it. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.